And for this bean, how many bean properties we required? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 bean properties we required, and the first 4 are simple strings. Table? In form, if you require table. Okay, table is for what? To populate data, right? You can design table. Here, to arrange these text fields, you can create table here. In table, you can use 1 TD for name, label, and 1 TD you can use for text box to arrange in a proper order. Okay, table you can use, or else without table also you can arrange them. We have one tag, right? Pre tag. In between pre and pre also we can put, right? The same arrangement, which type of arrangement we have here, the same arrangement view it will show us. Okay, but this pre tag is not recommended. The recommended one is table only. Okay. What?
To server we send data from form based only. From table it is possible.
From table?
It is possible.
Table is for only arrangement, right? You can create table here. Under table you can fix your text fields, no issue. Okay, you can go through table, or else you can write pre anything. You can write div here, no issue. And for this form we require to create a bean. That bean class we need to implement by using action form. It's a class. All these are classes only. So by extending from that action class, you have to create a bean class here. Actually we have 6 beans here. From that 6 bean types, you can use any one of those bean. Now here, you require to create a bean class, package like form beans. Form beans, write class here, public class employee, extend it from action form. And in this form bean class, what we should write here? How many properties we have? 5 bean properties we have. That 5 bean properties along with our required data types. What actually action servlet will do whenever I submit data? Action servlet will read input form data and it will hold into bean. Actually from request object, in the form of which data type it will read data? By default any form data it will read into string type. In case if it is multiple checkboxes, it will read it into string array type. So how it can hold the data into your required data types here? Let's say if I have ID field here, along with this name if I have ID field here, that ID property also I can write in my bean along with my required data type. Let's say if you have one more field, employee ID here, ID, and if you have one more text box, HTML colon text, and if you required one more property, you can write property ID. So one more bean property we should write here, right? So that bean property data type, your required data type you can write. Here internally it will do what? Implicit typecastings. It will read data, in the form of string. After reading data in the form of string, based on your bean property types, it will typecast it. So if you submit input data, integer from here, that data if you want to store into integer variable, you can create bean property here, private int ID, and for this name and email and address, strings are enough. Private string, name, email, address, and gender also, it's a type of string. So gender. And we have one more field, hobbies. It's an array type. So you have to create one more reference, string array of hobbies. Now all around we have 4 plus 2, 6 properties here. For these 6 properties, you need to generate here public, setter and getter methods. You must need to generate here public, getters and setter methods. In IDE we can generate, right? So you should generate public getter setter method here. And then this bean responsibility is what? It can apply form backup support. I mean, by using this bean you can achieve form backup support and validation support. By using this setters and getters you can achieve form backup support. To achieve form backup support, actually you have to use the setters and getters. And to provide validation support, here they given one method, public action errors. The method name is validate with input parameters HTTP servlet request, and they given one parameter action mapping. And this validate method you can use it for applying validations for your input fields. So how many input fields we have here? One ID, name, email, address, gender and hobbies. In case I want to check validations like this. In case if ID value if it is 0, I want to send error message to the input form. If name or email or address or gender value if it is null, I want to return. Actually, is it will store null values or empty strings? Empty strings actually it will store. Empty strings. In case if you don't pass any data from user input, it will store by default empty string values. By default servlets will give empty string values. Okay, simple string values they will return. So here I need to check that empty string. If it is equal to empty string, I need to return name required, email required, address required kind of error messages. And I need to check this hobbies. If hobbies array index, if 0 array index, if it is empty, I want to send one simple error message. At least one hobby is required. So how to write that conditions? ID I want to check whether it is 0 or not. If ID is 0, and the remaining, if name dot equals, if it is empty string, and if email dot equals empty string, if address if it contains empty string. And finally one more value, hobbies. If hobbies, okay, hobbies dot length I can find out right here, hobbies dot length. If the length, if it is length at least should 1, right? If the length if it is less than 1, I want to send error message. If I check by using index, what happens? If I don't pass any values from here, it will throws array index out of bound exceptions. If I use directly array indexes. So check length, on length you just apply condition here. So on these conditions what I need to add? Error messages I need to add. For my input form I need to add error messages here. So to which object we need to add error messages? The return value is action errors. To that action errors we need to add error messages. This action errors is similar like your map object. In collections we have map, right? Key value pair we can add. So this action errors is similar like your map object. You can add error messages like key and value. So first to create a action error object here. Action errors AE equaled new action errors. Create action errors object. For this action errors, you can add your required error messages. They given one method, add method. By using this add method, if you want to add error message to ID field, your field name and as well as required error message. And here AE dot add of your field name and required error message. And AE dot add of field name email, and for that email required error message. AE dot add of field name address, for that address required error message. And in case if hobbies, if it is empty, for hobbies I want to add error message. One thing here, you can add error message to action error object, but that error messages you must need to read from a properties file. Compulsory you have to read this error messages, whatever the error messages you want to add here. This error messages compulsory you need to read from a properties file. You have to create a dot properties file. From that properties file only we have to append error messages here. So you require to create a properties file for error messages. If you want to put error messages like this, like name is required, email is required, address is required type of error messages. Message 1 for ID, message 1 ID should not 0. Message 2 I want to send name should not empty. Message 3 for email should not empty. Message 4 address should not empty. Message 5 hobbies must one required, must one hobby is required, at least one hobby is required. Now that error messages if you want to read from properties file, let's say if the properties file, if it is messages dot properties file, you no need to read this properties file here. The properties file keys only you need to read here. Then who will read this properties file? Action servlet will read. Your action servlet will read this properties file and it will make available this keys data to us. So by using which class we need to read this keys here? There we have one class, action message class. New action message of create action message class object. In that action message class object constructor itself, you can pass your required messages. Message 1 from here it will read new action message of message 2, new action message of message 3, message 4, message 5. Now that keys it will read and it will append to your required fields. Finally what we have to return, the return type is what? Action errors. So your action error object you need to return. In this action error object what it will hold? In case if ID 0, ID error message. In case if name 0, name error message. In case if email 0, email error message. If address 0, address message. For hobbies, hobbies error messages it will add to your action error object. Finally that object you need to return to your input form. To populate that error object data in your input form, to print this action error object data in this input form, we don't have any specific error tags here. To populate error messages on same input page, you require to configure one more tag here, HTML : errors. In case whenever you redirect your action error object to same page, to populate error messages we have to use HTML : errors tag. Then it will populate your validate method error messages on same input page. Actually without having this controller also we can test. Just validations if you want to test, this controller don't require. Just you can provide mappings in between form to bean, bean to form, just to test validations. Okay, without having controller also you can test here. Now I have a input form and I have a form bean class, and inside web.xml file I should configure front controller servlet action servlet. Now if you want to provide mappings in between index.jsp page and your bean, two mappings required to provide. One is bean, form to bean, then the next one is bean to form. So where exactly we need to configure it? Under struts config.xml file. In struts config.xml file, the mapping between input form and bean class, and the bean class and input form. You have to create a struts XML file, struts-config.xml file. In this XML file we have 6 tags here. The main root tag is struts-config. Tags.
You mentioned that HTML colon error tag where it will display.
On top of your form.
I want to display particular.
Yes, it is possible. I'll show you. Okay, it's possible. You can print beside your fields also. By using names, you can read it. Okay, I'll show you. Just it is type of iteration. Okay. If I print list object, all the list values it will print. If I do iteration, one value it will print. You can do iteration by using your form parameter names. Okay. Just here place is not enough to write the tags. Okay. You can write here. So in between struts config and struts config, here we have 6 tags, 6 important tags we have here. Those important tags, from those important tags, the first one is form beans. By using this form beans tag, what we should do? We have to create one reference for our bean class. For our bean class, we have to create here. So always bean classes references need to create in between form beans and form beans. Here we have a child tag, form bean reference name. That's a simple employee form emp, employee form. And the class name you should configure by using type attribute, and the package name is form beans, and your class name employee. So your bean reference emp. Just we have to create reference here, bean reference. Then next you have to provide mappings. To provide mappings, the main important tag is here to provide mappings, action mappings. In between this action mappings and action mappings, what we have to map? Form to bean, bean to form. So here to map form to bean, action path, my form action is registration, but must I need to put slash first. Slash registration. Whenever the request is from this slash registration, I need to map to what? My bean class. So that bean class reference name you should configure here. My bean reference name is what? emp. Just I want to populate in this same bean. That emp reference you have to pass here. And if you want to execute validations in your class, in this bean class, if you want to execute validations, then we have an attribute validate. Validate equal to, if you configure true, by default it is true, we don't need to configure it also. By default it is true. By default it is true. And if validations executes, if it find any error messages, it need to return that error message to same input form. So that input form name you should configure here by using attribute input. The form name is what? Index.jsp. Two ways configurations. One is our form to bean, the next bean to again form to populate error messages. This form name you should configure to populate what? Error messages. After completion of validation errors, to populate validation errors, we require to configure this page here. That's it. We don't have any action class, means controller class, right? Without having controller also you can test it. And from where it need to read error messages? It need to read error messages, right? From messages properties file. That properties file name you should configure here. message hyphen resources parameter. You can configure here your properties file. Base name only we should configure here. Base name only we should configure here. To support I18N, we have to use only base name. Base name means without dot properties extension. Only base name we should configure here.